Caolan Robertson, a journalist from Ireland, he's the one who risks his life going to Donbas or even to Kursk to show the true side of Russia's war. He breaks the aggressor's propaganda and persistently keeps pushing the truth to bring Ukraine's victory closer. And he's with me now, and I wanted to hear his independent view and perspective. Hi, Caolan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, and the least I can tell you, thank you for your professionalism, huge professionalism in Ukraine.
No, I really appreciate it. I mean, I'm trying to always do the absolute best I can with the sort of quality, making sure all the facts are right with everything I put out. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we see that you are just doing a lot of videos. And yeah, one of the latest video you made, it's from Estonia, from the military drills.
Yeah.
Tell me, please, I know that you are preparing some big video about that, but I saw some, like, not a huge piece about that. So what is the mood there in Estonia? Are they really seriously prepared that Russia going to open the second front?
They are ready in Estonia for what Russia wants to do, because Russia isn't going to stop at Ukraine. Putin has already said in his own statements he wants to keep marching west. He wants to keep marching west through the Baltics, all the way to Poland. And Estonians were colonized by the Soviets in exactly the same way that Ukrainians were. And so they know what Russia is capable of and what life was like under the Soviet occupation. So while Putin went to Alaska, I decided that I wanted to go to Estonia because the world media was all gathered around listening to him talk about peace and listening to his lies, talking about how he wants a ceasefire in Ukraine, he wants to stop all of this, stop all the killing. I decided to go to Estonia because they are preparing, they're digging trenches, they're preparing for what Putin really wants, and that's war with everything around Russia. And so NATO were there were British, American, German and French soldiers, there were American Marines there, all doing training exercises, firing tanks into the forests, preparing for the worst case scenario for Estonians, which is that the Russians will storm across the Narva River, will storm into their country and do another invasion, which is what they will do if they can. And they're taking it really, really seriously. I mean, these were Challenger 2 tanks, British tanks and Swedish tanks firing into the forest this week. It's extremely serious. And they're digging, again, fallback trenches. There's a bridge across the Narva River. This is a river that separates not just Estonia and Russia, but NATO and the EU and Russia. This river has been fought over for 700 years. And for the first time, the bridge that crosses Estonia and Russia, it was called the Friendship Bridge, has anti-tank trenches on it, has anti-tank mines on it, and has dragon teeths on it now. And that's to stop Russian tanks steaming across it, because Estonians are actually taking this so seriously. Because if you have Russia as your neighbor, as you know exactly what they're capable of. And so instead of going to Estonia and listening to Putin talk nonsense about peace, that's why I went to Estonia, to listen to people that actually knew what Russia wanted.
Yeah, Estonia has a long history with Russia. Finland has a long history with Russia, not very pleasant one. You've seen how the Western soldiers training. You saw how the Ukrainian soldiers fighting. From your perspective and observation, do you think they are ready for the contemporary Russian tactics they are using on the east of Ukraine, despite the fact that you said they have a lot of contemporary weapon and yes?
No other country in the world is prepared to understand the Russian threat as much as the Ukrainian military. The tactics that Russia has been developing with their FPVs, with their drones, with their fiber optics are well beyond what any other army on earth is equipped with. The US tweeted out, I think it was the US Army Twitter account, tweeted about 6 weeks ago saying, we just did an experiment and dropped a drone from a grenade for the first time ever. This is something that Ukrainians have been doing for years. And people were laughing at it here because that's how behind the US is in even understanding the new tactics of drone warfare. Estonia are pretty good. A lot of the drone units that I spent time with in Estonia had learnt directly from what Ukrainians are doing on the front lines. They showed me frontline FPVs and sort of drones that I've seen in the Donbas in Estonia, but it's still nowhere near enough to combat the Russian threat. We spend across Europe, on average, less than 1% of our GDP on defense. Russia is spending nearly 50% of their economy on defense. And when you put those two things together, one side isn't equipped enough yet at all. Ukraine are basically the only country on earth that are equipped to deal with the Russian army. And that's how they've held it off, I think, for nearly 4 years. And if the Russians, I remember reading stats recently that said if the British army came into Ukraine and started directly fighting on the front lines in the same way that Ukrainians would, we would run out of artillery in 3 days. That's how much stuff we have. That's how prepared we are. It's well behind. And that's why it's good to support Ukraine, I think, as well, because this country has learned cutting-edge information about frontline warfare and the way that it's changing through AI, through drone systems, that is vital for any country on earth that cares about defense. And I don't think any other country is prepared as Ukraine. And it's super, super worrying. It takes a lot to combat the Russian army. I've seen it close up. I always say that Russia is failing in a lot of ways, their economy is collapsing, but they're pretty well equipped on the front line and they're throwing everything they can, not just at Ukraine, but Europe. And it's going to take a lot for everyone else to wake up, you know?
Yeah, but do they pretty well equipped thanks to who? Thanks to other dictators they're friends with, like China, Iran, North Korea?
There's an axis that's been formed, and it's Iran, and it's China, and it's Russia, and it's North Korea. It used to be Syria, but since Assad fled to Moscow, they no longer have that as an ally. And that is basically the powerhouse of the Russian army right now. Iran is supplying so much of the technology. That's why the drones are called Shaheeds. North Korea are supplying the troops. China are helping to circumvent the sanctions and provide the tech. And it looks like other countries as well will start getting involved too. And the most annoying thing about that is we have all, in the West, allowed an alliance to exist without any question. The idea that British troops should enter Ukraine is so heavily debated. How could we possibly get involved? But Russia can openly call up North Korea and say, hey, can we get 30,000 troops? Can we get 50,000 troops? And no one says a thing. And that's the main difference. It's almost like in World War II, you had the Allies and the Axis powers, but only one side would have an actual cohesive group, and the other side was still split. And that's kind of what's happening right now. Europe is not united in the same way that this new axis with Russia is united, because Russia alone couldn't continue this war without help from evil dictatorships all around the planet. And that's what's funding this war, and that's what's keeping it going. And until that stops, and until all that runs out, or until Europe gets itself together, it's just going to continue.
Peace guarantees. The question they're discussing now, it's on the surface, it's everywhere, every headline, and especially after Oval Office meeting in the White House with American President Zelensky and European leaders. We have a strong discussion after this week, and they are talking seriously, from my perspective, about the peacekeeping missions in Ukraine, at least at the west of Ukraine. Where do you think we're going with it?
I think it's very unlikely that there'll be any kind of peacekeeping efforts. Every single time there's been a mention of the word peace to do with NATO or Ukraine ends up with just delays and with nothing. And even if Britain or even if NATO put troops on the ground in Ukraine to guarantee peace, all that Russia would do would be pollute our airwaves in Britain and Ireland and the rest of the world, to say, get troops off the ground, bring our troops home, get our troops out of Ukraine. And by the time the next election kicks in, they'd probably withdraw, because Russia, I think what the main failure is, Western countries and liberal democracies don't understand the Soviet mindset, the Soviet thinking, which is 100 years ahead. They're willing to get through millions of Russians until they take this country, until they take the rest of Europe. And we're thinking in a tiny short-term strategy that we can just temporarily hold peace just to see how it goes. And I think that's the sort of the main difference between what's going on here. And so, yeah, putting British troops on the ground, we have a government that changes every 4 years. Probably the next government promises, because of Russian propaganda, would say that we'll take our troops home and we'll just let everything go. But every single time that the West has had any kind of peace promises with Russia, it's ended in chaos. In 2009, Hillary Clinton stood with Sergei Lavrov, and she had a big red button, and she said, we're going to hit this button and we're going to reset our relationship with Russia. We're going to forget about the bad days of the Cold War. We're going to forget about all of that horrible stuff, and we're going to renew our relationship with peace. Well, look what happened next. We had the invasion of Crimea. We had the Donetsk People's Republic set up and the disruption that happened there. And we had Russia wage a hybrid war all across the rest of Europe. And so every single time there's any mention of peacekeeping or guarantees in this country, Ukraine has been betrayed by the West every time. Even in 1994, this country had the third largest nuclear arsenal on the planet, and they gave it up. And I visited the museum and I saw those silos where those nuclear weapons are now gathering dust. And Ukraine promised to give it up for peace, for these sanctions. And look what happened now.
Yeah, so if Budapest memorandum doesn't work, and if Minsk agreement, it didn't go anywhere, didn't lead anywhere, what security guarantees will be the best for Ukraine? No, the realistic. No, the best is the one topic, but realistic. Caolan, what are realistic for now?
The only security guarantees right now is the West realizing that the only way that Ukraine can survive is if Russia is destroyed economically. Russia will not stop doing what it's doing until it can't afford to do it anymore. And the West has the power to do that. The West can do more sanctions, and the West can also sanction India, which trades all of its oil. If Russia can't afford to pay soldiers to kill Ukrainians, this would stop in days. That's the only way to stop Russia. Anything else is genuinely just a delay tactic to allow Russia to rearm. And I think that's possible. I'm extremely hopeful for Ukraine. I think this country will survive, and it has for so long, and it will be a success story. But only when Russia is economically destroyed. There is nothing that will stop the imperialist, colonialist ambitions of the Soviet mindset.
They don't give a damn about people. Why? The soldiers, I mean, and the people of Russia as well.
I mean, a lot of people from the UK and from the West say that once Putin's gone, all this will stop. And I don't think that's true. Because from the lower to the upper class of Russian society, there's a fundamental indifference to human life. And it's actually quite a racist and fascist mindset. And it's that if you're not from the motherland of Russia, your life doesn't matter. You're a state to be colonized. You're a person to be ridiculed and subjugated. And that exists throughout every single corner of the Soviet mindset. And the only way that's dealt with is if it's isolated. These people will always exist, Russia will always exist, but it should be isolated from the rest of the world. Unable to arm itself, unable to afford a war, and unable to travel, unable to do holidays in Europe, unable to do anything. That's the only way that that mindset is done, is contained. But yeah.
You know what, Caolan? I told that when I was in 2022 in the United Nations headquarters. I was there as a part of a program. So I was speaking about that Russians have to pay for their country policy. Whenever they have to be isolated. They have to feel it. And they said that that's a racism to me. They said that I'm a racist in a way of, does that make sense?
Yeah, the word Russophobia has been weaponized by Russians to stop any criticism of what they're doing around the world. The only racism in any way attached to this conversation is the racism of the Russian mindset, which is to despise every other person on earth, unless you're ethnically Russian. But this has been weaponized. The words that you recalled is standard Kremlin tactics to shut people down, to criticize Russia. If you behave like an incredibly insane dictatorship, like North Korea does, we isolate them. And when we criticize them, people don't call us racist. But Russia has weaponized our language. They've weaponized so much of our news feeds and the way that we have discourse. They bought our newspapers, the Lebedevs bought the London Evening Standard, that it works and it sticks to criticize, to shut down anyone like you were in 2022. Slowly, people are waking up now, and the word Russophobia has less weight. But it was nonsense. Russians don't think you're racist for saying this. They kind of know what you're talking about, and a lot of people are slowly waking up to it. But it's just a garbage Kremlin tactic to shut people down.
Yeah, Caolan, you're traveling a lot to the east, and it's very hard to catch you in Kyiv, to see you in Kyiv. So you're always traveling on the east, on the front line. How the front line has changed?
The front line has changed in a massive way. When I first
in favor?
So in terms of the tactics, when I was first going to the Donbas, everything was artillery, everything was with missiles. And now if you go, the sounds of those artillery is very quiet. It's mainly drones, it's buzzing in the air, the sounds, the type of munitions that are being used. Everything has become a drone warfare. Russia still occupies less land now in Ukraine than they did in 2022, and they're taking it incredibly slowly. And that should be the message that people remember in the world most about all of this. But it's also a difficult time. Russia have showed that they're willing to expense now more than 1 million of their soldiers. And a British intelligence report has come out and said it might take 4.5 years and another 1 million Russians to fully take the 4 oblasts that Putin wants: Zaporizhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Kherson. And the difficult thing is, the more that I visit the front, the more I watch life drain from every town and city. And the more I realize that Russia is willing to just expense everything they possibly can. And it's difficult. It's really difficult. because I watched Dobrobylia change from a place full of life. This was a market town. It was beautiful. About 3 months ago, I always used to stop there for hot dogs, and I was there about 2 months ago, and the last church had closed, and everyone was hiding inside, and it had become deserted. I'm seeing the same in Konstantinivka and so many of these different places. And it's hard because the world's attention has moved to things that are happening in Israel, to the Alaska peace summits. But what's happening there is no different to how it was at the beginning, which is a constant push. And again, unless people see what's happening, this is why I go there and show it as much as possible, and see what Ukrainians are not just fighting for every day, but the destruction and chaos, then the sanctions aren't going to be put in that need to be put in. But also, it's an extremely difficult situation. I'm going back again to Kramatorsk in 2 days to do another update because the Russians have been hitting this city constantly recently. And the only way that people can continue to remember what's going on there and see what's going on there is if you have frontline journalists on the ground filming it firsthand. And it's extremely expensive to do that, and it's extremely risky to do that. And so there's not many people there. And that's the main reason that I go. But the most important fulfilling thing is, if you look at American media and right-wing media, they say that these oblasts are Russian because people speak Russian. But every single soldier that I've ever spoken to in the Donbas, and I ask them every single time what their main motivation is, they say that they're here to get the Russian army out of their country. Yes, they speak Russian. That's how colonialism works. They speak English in Ireland. That doesn't mean that Britain should take back Ireland. But it shows what they're really fighting for, because people around the world I don't really think they understand what Ukrainians are truly fighting for. And when you show the landscape, when I show Sloviansk and Dobrobylia and so many of these beautiful towns with so much connection with history and generations, people's families were buried there in their graveyards. They have deep emotional connections to these lands.
So people in the world justifying that with what? That we're just some part of Russian-speaking population? What? Is that for people in the West, well-educated people, a reason for the war?
I think that Russian propaganda has been put out to the tune of billions of dollars to convince people that Ukraine is Russia and these oblasts are Russian. And Ukraine hasn't put out billions of dollars of counter-propaganda. No other country has put out any counter-propaganda. Yes. And it's worked. I travel all around the world. I was just in Cambodia. I was just in different countries, and people ask me what it's like in Ukraine. And they confuse it with Russia all the time, and that's because of Russian disinformation. And again, Steve Witkoff said it himself. This is part of Trump's convoy. He came out and he said, they speak Russian in these territories. There have been referendums in these territories, and they want to be part of Russia. These are referendums at gunpoint, coming out of the Kremlin. But the only way to really show exactly what people are fighting for in the Donbas, I've found, is to go there and ask them, and to show the soldiers wide-eyed saying to get the Russian army out because this is my home. And we know how Russians treat us when they were in Bucha. We saw how Russians treated us when we were under occupation in Kherson, and we don't want that for a single other person in our country. And it's just the reality, you know.
You were one of the first journalists who got to Kursk region during the operation of Ukrainian armed forces. What was your impression about the people? Well,
it goes back to what we were saying earlier. I was very worried to go into Kursk for the first time because I'd never been in a situation that extreme before. But what I found was we went into a shopping mall right in the center and we spoke to Russians who were looting their own supermarkets, which is very, on brand. And I asked them what they thought about Ukraine, what they thought about the war. And they said, it's really annoying. We can't make phone calls back to our relatives because the network towers are down. It's really annoying because things weren't how they were a few weeks ago when the Ukrainians were here. We couldn't go on TikTok and Instagram. They were complaining about their own situation being slightly disgruntled. They couldn't care less about what they were doing to Ukraine. And the soldier that I was with turned around to them and said, how do you think Ukrainians feel without food, water and electricity because of what your country's doing? And they just shrugged. Because fundamentally, Russians at every corner of society have an indifference to human life if they're not Russian. And I witnessed that firsthand by speaking to Russians in Russia. And Russians don't like people talking about this as well. This was humiliating for Russia. It's why they put me on the international wanted list for going in there and speaking to them. But it was telling. It was telling. The Russians didn't say, it's difficult for us, we can't make phone calls, but, this is how a war is, and our president shouldn't have invaded Ukraine. They said it was annoying and they were inconvenienced.
But that's civilians, right?
Civilians, everyday civilians, men and women.
Have you had a chance to talk with a Russian soldier?
Not yet. I've been given the opportunity to speak to some prisoners of war soon, which I will. I'd like to ask them what motivates them to wake up in the morning and kill Ukrainians.
Money.
And it's
money.
Money. Yeah. Well, I assume that's going to be the answer.
No,
money.
That's, we know with you that's money. They probably will. They trained, I think, to answer such questions. I don't know. Not sure.
It's. I mean, I haven't done it in a while because I think it's fairly obvious anyway what the intentions are of Russians, and it's money. It's also an indifference to their own lives as well, right? When a Russian soldier dies, I've seen Russians put on TikTok almost celebrating, saying what kind of car they're going to get as a payout, what kind of money they're going to get by the government because their husband died or their brother died, because they don't care about human life. They care about human life this much when it's Russian and this much when it's everyone else. But yeah, the reason I went to Kursk, the main reason, was to show, because I knew that when Ukrainians pulled out, that Russian disinformation would go into overdrive, and the Kremlin did go into overdrive. They said that there were war crimes carried out every 2 minutes. They said that Russian civilians were massacred and murdered in the streets. And I filmed children cycling through the streets. I filmed everyone being given aid and people walking around pretty happy, and it countered that Russian propaganda massively. But that was kind of the main motivation to go. And also it's quite funny to show that I can go to Russia without a passport as the country that's pretending to be so brave and so, mighty. Yeah.
We were approaching to my next question. We already discussed what makes them effective in some way, but what myths about Russian army you would like to break?
Myths about the Russian army. The idea that we shouldn't poke the bear, that the Russian army is something to be feared as this huge, terrifying force on earth, comes from the Cold War days. And it's an outdated ideology, it's an outdated mindset. Russia is a fraction of what it was when it was the Soviet Union back in the Cold War days. After its collapse, Russia's quite a new country as well. Russia was started, in the 1990s. It's a new country with a failing economy, with an economy smaller than Italy's. And I think if you want to understand what the Russian army is as well, you have to understand that Ukraine took and held Russian territory in Kursk for 8 months. And Russia couldn't take back their own land without bringing in troops from North Korea and weapons from Iran and electronics from China. They couldn't take back their own land without that. And it shows how much of a point of weakness they're coming from. And I know at the start of this conversation as well, I said, it doesn't mean that they're completely weak. There's still millions of 18-year-olds that graduate every single year, that turn 18 every single year, that can be drafted in Russia. But when it comes to actual logistics on the front line, these people are soldiers that were pulled out of mental asylums and prisons. These people are criminals that have been pardoned for fighting on the front line. And the main difference that I've found between interviewing Ukrainian soldiers and seeing what I saw in Russia is one side knows what they're fighting for, their land, their country, and their people. The other side just wants a paycheck. They don't know what they're fighting for. They have no idea why they're in the Donbas. They have no idea why they've been told to kill Ukrainians. And that's the main difference in mentality that I've seen. One side has no idea what they're doing. And they're disorganized and a mess because their country is a mess. And I think things like Kursk showed that. And videos, now that we can get FPV videos showing that, I mean, we can see videos of Russian soldiers killing their own commanders. I did a video about Russians resorting to cannibalism on the front line. This isn't something we've seen in Europe since the siege of Stalingrad in the 1940s, which shows a complete breakdown of logistics and chaos. Jake Bro runs a great campaign, an American YouTuber called Save the Donkeys, because Russian army in certain areas are using donkeys because they run out of equipment. And, the Russians recruit their own soldiers by basically lying to civilians. They say, you'll do a 6-month contract and you'll be an engineer nowhere near the front. The second they get to the front, they're put immediately in an assault and they're told that they can't leave. And so it's a completely disastrous way to run an army.
Do you remember a pro-Russian American who he just went kind of for trainings? I don't remember the purpose, but then he ended up on the front line.
This is the Hoffman family. I emailed his wife when this happened. And I said, can I do an interview with you? Because I've noticed what's going on here. And I was talking about it. And she said, right now, I'm not too sure I want to talk about it. And then he obviously went to the front. He's still alive. I spoke to her like a week ago, and he is actually still alive. This was a bit of disinformation. But also, he went to the front line and she went to live in Russia because of Russian propaganda being so successful. In America, if you scroll through your news feeds, you'll see things from Russia Today saying that it's a bastion of Christendom. It's not woke. There's no drag queen story hours. It's beautiful. Everyone is happy. It's a conservative Christian dream. And they go there and they realize it's a demonic nation, right? This is a country that bombs cathedrals in Odessa, that bombs churches in Izium, that destroys and tortures priests in Kherson. But they don't get that until they get there. And her husband, Derek Hoffman, he was promised this 6 months contract to be an engineer, and she did a vlog about it, and she said it's going to be great. He's going to be like helping out, fixing trucks, this and this, and then she did a very distressing video saying he's been told that he has to fight on the front, and we don't know what to do, and we're just praying for him every day. And it's like, but that is what Russia is. They have no value for human life, and they'll happily lie. It's a mafia state, and it works on people like her who decided to move all the way across the planet and live in Russia from America with her kids. But it also works with people in America who just listen to it and believe it. And it's the biggest lie ever told, that Russia is in any way a moral country, a Christian country. The only priests in Russia are priests in costume. And, you know, they weaponize this. They say, oh, they shut down Christianity in Kyiv and in Ukraine because they hate Christianity. No, they shut down FSB churches, where I literally did interviews with people talking about how some of the priests that were here in Kyiv, Russian priests, were using confessions of Ukrainians that were going to that church and then sending that information to the FSB. These are sort of hangouts and headquarters of Russian intelligence gathering.
I'm so happy I'm Greek Catholic. I'm doing my confessions there.
Yeah, that'll be okay. Yeah, I think Greek Catholic's okay. The churches that were the FSB hangouts are shut down now. But no, but it's so frustrating because I can see it for what it is, and I've watched this disinformation before I first got here and watched it all debunked. And I even believed some of this stuff when I first came to Ukraine in early 2023. I thought, well, I was with John Sweeney. I thought, aren't they throwing priests in jail? Like, there's something weird going on here. Isn't there corruption? And it wasn't until I actually saw what was happening with my own eyes, I was like, oh, it's this different. And if I was wrong about that, I can imagine millions of other people would be wrong about it too. And not everyone can come to Ukraine to see the truth. But yeah, disinformation works if you have money.
If you have money. I remember I was listening one of the Israeli leaders, and some of the journalists asked him, what is the best way of to fight with propaganda? And he said, only facts. And to be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not saying out loud here to lie. I'm just saying that I don't know, for those who brainwashed with Russian propaganda, it's very hard to fight with real, honest facts. It's always, the truth is always feels like it's something unreal.
Truth isn't enough alone. I mean, if you have billions of dollars of great propaganda flooding people's news feeds, it works. It's just about reach. I mean, it's quite depressing even talking about it myself, because the main purpose and the main reason that I go to these places and film on the front line is to say that I always believe that truth is the number one antidote to propaganda. But it's very hard to get that out there to the people that really, really need to see it, people whose news feeds have been polluted. And when you have things like the Tenet media scandal, this is where Margarita Simonyan put about $25 million into American and Canadian influencers. This was found out. It was a huge deal. The Supreme Court of Justice in America uncovered it. We realized just how much money there actually is in this. And truth alone isn't going to counter that. And it's also in the age where we don't watch mainstream media anymore. You know, it used to be that you used to go to college to become a journalist and you'd be verified and fact-checked, and you get a job at the BBC and you climb your way up, or CNN. And that's where people got their news from. There was a common culture of information. Now, you know, we consume 300 foot of newsfeed every single day. If you printed out our news feeds, it would be the length of a football stadium, a massive amount of information that's unfiltered and easily manipulated in a way that it wasn't 10 years ago when we were reading the mainstream media. So the whole landscape is very open and porous to disruption. But it's not all bad. YouTube just deleted last month 2,000 YouTube accounts linked to the Kremlin, which is good, English speaking. So they're slowly dealing with it. You know what gives me also hope? When I was scrolling, sometimes I'm scrolling comments under your videos, and
it surprised me how many people from abroad thanks you for covering Ukrainian war. And not only Ukrainians, of course, Ukrainians are very grateful, but I mean, the people from the West, they are eager to hear someone's opinion, and it's yours. I mean, it gives me hope that people are just want that, despite all this disinformation are spreading in the United States and Europe.
I believe that most people are good in the world, and most Americans support Ukraine, and most people in Britain support Ukraine. And it might be hard to see that if we look at our news feeds and we see what Donald Trump is saying, or we see what propagandists are saying. But the majority of my views are people from the United States, and they're people desperate to know what's happening here because they care about Ukraine. And they see it as their struggle too, in a lot of ways. You know, America and Europe have been united as continents forever, basically. And they see an injustice. And when everyday regular people, especially Americans who love their democracy, see injustice in the world, they stand up against it. They can't stand it. And I think that's why I have so many of them in my comments, so many Americans saying that they're grateful to know the truth about what's happening here, because America loves democracy. This country loves democracy. Americans watched in 2014 when here in Maidan, they decided to look west as their president looked east, and they waved American flags. And there's a brotherhood, there's a sisterhood with that. And that's why I think so many people still care so much about what's happening here. And it's unfortunate there aren't a lot of reporters here doing it full time, but there's still millions of people who care every day about what's happening in Ukraine and wish for the survival of this country.
You know what struck me about you and shocked me about you at first when I was watching your videos? When you were traveling on the east, on the front lines, in your car with the soldiers together, your smile. Caolan, you're always smiling. It's like, it feels like you're a fearless, despite the fact that you're saying that it was very scary for you to go to Kursk with no documents, you know, you're going, I agree, it's very dangerous. But how, I mean, do you have a superpower?
It's because I'm with good people whenever I go to the Donbas. It's people that are fighting every single day for something good, and I'm always in the best company there. And I love going into the real world, going to where it really matters here and telling the truth. I love making these films, and there's just, whenever I go to the front as well, I stay with units in the places they are, whether it's dugouts or in just in a bunk bed, and the companionship that you get with the men and women fighting there every single day is amazing. Just, I'm completely inspired whenever I go to east in Ukraine or south in Ukraine. And so I think that's also why I'm smiling the whole time. Also, you know, the reality is Ukrainians have a great sense of humor. And, you know, the last time I was at the front, a missile hit the power station and I was getting a little bit worried. This was in Sumy, probably 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And one of the commanders went, "Don't worry, we'll put on a show. We don't have Netflix anymore because the power's out." And he put a torch up and they started making kind of bunny sound effects and putting on a show with this. And I was like, that's what Ukraine is as well. Yeah. And that's why I'm always smiling when I'm there, because it's also life, and life also carries on here every single time, and it's really beautiful. It's horrible in so many ways, but it's beautiful to see resilience like that. It's something that I think we've lost so much in Britain, and where I come from as well. So many people are lost and they don't know their sense of purpose in life, and you can really feel this country knows what it is and what it's fighting for. And I'm genuinely inspired by it. It's why I work constantly editing all the time as well, because every Ukrainian I know just every single day just works extremely hard, and if I don't do the same, I feel a bit like, you know.
But still, your smile is something unique,
no.
To be honest.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm just going back to the conversation about the Russian propaganda. Your interview with this guy from member of European Parliament, VDS. For those who may not know, he's a super pro-Russian member of Parliament, European Parliament. He has lots of millions of subscribers, but he's spreading a true lie about Ukraine, like simple lie about Ukraine. Tell me how the story started.
Right. Phidias had no idea what he was getting in for when he agreed to do this interview. And people ask me all the time, how on earth did you get in front of this person? Because he's been retweeted by Elon Musk every day. He has been putting out the worst Kremlin propaganda that I've seen from any politician in Europe. So you agree Russia is guilty of kidnapping tens of thousands of Ukrainian children and they should be returned?
I think there is a lot of children. I'm not, because they said 20,000. Because they said 20,000. Because some of the kids there, they might want to be.
What are you talking about? What do you mean they want to be? They are children that were kidnapped by Russia. What do you mean they want to be? What on earth are you talking about?
A lot of kids, they want to return, and they should return if they want to.
What
I
children?
will not force.
No. Where did you get that from? What children want to be returned, want to stay in Russia? And how do you even know that?
And so I started investigating him. I spoke to friends that I used to have. I spoke to people that I used to work with. And he wasn't responding to me for an interview request, but I wanted to put all these questions by him. So I put out a TikTok and I said, I'm investigating Phidias and he's not responded to my emails. And I am going to be doing a big expose on him. And that video got 1 million views. And what I realized about Phidias is all he cares about is views and clout. So he unblocked me and he emailed me and he said, actually, if you like, we can do a sit-down interview in the EU Parliament on his terms. And he said he would book a private room and he would basically film it and it would all be kind of done on his terms. And I knew that I was going to be in for a trap, right? Basically what he was doing is he was going to say, right, I'm going to do an ambush and I'm going to have my team film you. I'm going to selectively edit it and you won't know what to do. But I know people in the European Parliament. So I made some phone calls and I said, I'm going to be interviewing this person and I want to do it right in the middle of Parliament so he can't run away. And I want to get in there before he thinks I'm in there. So I got a train to Brussels and I got in with a press pass before he knew that I was even there. I was going to meet him at 2:00. And he thought that I was kind of just like a TikToker, like a YouTuber. He didn't really know that I have a background in journalism, right? That I would actually be doing this properly. So I did all my research and I put right in the center of Parliament 2 tall chairs, 2 tall stools. And I set up and I hired a whole film crew to start recording the whole time, 4 different angles. And I called him up 5 minutes before he was due to meet me outside and I said, Phidias, I'm actually already in Parliament. I know a friend here, so why don't you just come in and we can chat? And it was almost like Chris Hansen, take a seat. And he sort of turns up and sits down and he's looking very nervous. And he's like, okay, well, shall we get started? And I had my whole crew, everything prepared there. And I think at that moment he realized that he wasn't in control anymore. But that's how I managed to get that interview. And that's what I immediately said to him, who paid for your Moscow trip? And what did they buy? Because he had just come from Moscow for Victory Day parade. And he had a few questions lined up to try and tailgate me, to try and throw me off. But I knew exactly what kind of person he is and exactly what he was going to do. He tried to put his hands on me. He tried to slow it down. He tried to throw me off. And I was like, Phidias, I'm not interested in this. Why did you vote against returning Ukrainian children that were abducted? And he turned around and said, what if they wanted to be? And this was a mask-off moment. And this made waves on Cypriot television, on Italy TV. This was all over local news saying that he disgraced their country. And I think it's very unlikely he'll get voted back in again. And since then, he's put out almost no Russian propaganda since that video.
Yeah.
It got millions of views.
That was interesting. What was the result of it?
It was a pretty successful result.
Yeah.
I mean, he edited the version that I filmed and he tried to put it out to his audience. He got a few thousand. It wasn't much. I got 2.5 million views. On Instagram, it was similar. On TikTok, it was similar. And members of Parliament were shaking my hand as I was leaving Brussels, coming up to me in the street saying, thank you so much for confronting him. And people saw who he really was. In old school journalism, the only way to really find out who someone is to sit down and put it to them and confront them. We saw this with the Prince Andrew interview with Emily Maitlis. We've seen this with so many sort of big high-profile interviews where you sit down from someone, they can't get away, and you just put it to them. And that's basically what I did with him. And since then, I haven't seen a single thing he's put out that's pro-Kremlin, that's pro-Russia. And I think it stopped him doing it, which is a success because one of the biggest pro-Russian propagandists in Parliament, a seat in the European Parliament, a seat where he could vote on sanctions, on aid to Ukraine, this is important, has now shut up about Kremlin lies. And I think that's a success story. And I didn't do it because of activism. I did it because I wanted to show the world his actual intentions and who he really was. And it was a huge success. And he was furious about it. I mean, it was probably one of the most tense and awkward interviews I've ever seen. But he had no idea that I would do that.
Do you have intentions or desire to record some of the Russian politicians, like, I don't know, Foreign Minister Lavrov?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm good at is combating Russian propaganda because I know how it works. You know, years and years ago, when I first started out in media, I got a job with a right-wing news network, you know, when I was 21. And I could see some of their talking points, I could see the kind of stuff that they were talking about, and I could see how propaganda works. And so I used that knowledge to fight it for years, for 8 years, doing work with Byline, and now doing work in Ukraine, because I can understand it for what it is. It's a bit like Bill Browder and how he used to work with people like Putin and that understands that mindset. Problem is, most of those people are in Russia, and they're very, very, very hard to get to. And they know that if they are confronted like Phidias is, that their lives would fall apart straight away. But there are a few things that I've lined up secretly in the background to do similar things to Phidias that I'm working on.
You're working on.
I'm working on it.
Yeah, because why I'm asking, because I really, your courage inspires me. Because in 2022, when I was in the United Nations headquarters in New York, and there was, remember there was Zelensky going in September when there was the assembly, and Lavrov, there was a long discussion whether the Russians will be allowed to go to the United States or not, and they entered. And then, after all the meetings, after Zelensky left New York with his wife, Lavrov gave the press conference in the United Nations headquarters. And to be honest, that was 2022. I'm sitting in front of the person who's killing my people, and there was a full hall of people, and I didn't have. It was the press conference was maybe 40 minutes maximum. It's nothing, and people were just from Al Jazeera, BBC, and ABC News. They were, they had a chance to talk to him, and you know what? It's unbelievably hard to confront him. I don't know. I mean, I could never. That's why I'm asking you, because that's something I haven't seen before. Once you said in your videos that when Russia comes, darkness follows.
Yes.
Well, that's the person like Putin who brings this darkness into the room, like Dementors from Harry Potter. Something like that, who, taking all the happiness from everyone.
Yeah, these people are the eye of the storm that's created. They're the people. Yes. I can't imagine what it would be like as a Ukrainian to be sitting on front of someone like that. As someone like me who's from another country,
I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream in that room. To be honest, I met him personally, and I said, I don't know, maybe I'm going to cut it out, but I will tell you that I was going to the conference, and there was the journalist from Associated Press, and she said, Natalie, are you going to the press conference of Lavrov? No, or just something like that. And I'm like, what? That city conference of Lavrov? And I hear behind my back his voice asking me, what conference? Caolan, I didn't know what to answer.
Yeah.
And I just turned to him like, you? and that's it. That's all I said. That's why I'm impressed by the journalist's courage, because I didn't have that. I was numb in front of the person who's killing my people. I was numb.
I mean, again, if I was in your situation, I don't think I would have been able to do the same thing.
No, Caolan, you're different. You're different.
I think like the number one thing that should give anyone confidence if they're ever in a situation, whether they want to get into journalism or do anything like this, is to realize that if you're on the side of truth and justice, and if you're on the side of genuine truth, you have nothing to worry about. And these people are far more scared of you than you are of them. Lavrov would be far more threatened by you than anybody else, because you represent the opposite of all of his lies. And he knows that if you confronted him on camera, that they would fall apart. And
I didn't have any cameras there.
One day. I mean, there's a million different versions of Lavrov that will always exist. Obviously, it's harder in Ukraine because they're, they're at the other side of the front line. Yeah. But it's something I want to focus a lot more on. My first video in Ukraine, when I went independent, was against, did you see Nick Shirley, the kid that came here and he filmed for TikTok the flashy cars in Kyiv and pulled silly faces and said that there was no war in Ukraine, basically, because...
No.
Yeah, this is the first, and I confronted him and did a big video about this.
Seriously?
This is one of my first things,
somehow I missed that.
Yeah, I'll show you this later. But I think I'm quite good at that, because again, if you know that you're on the side of good and you've seen what Russia is doing here, then all you can do is show people a mirror of themselves, and that's it. But no, Phidias is just the beginning. I've got plenty of plans.
I'm excited, to be honest. I'm excited. The question... I was just reading the article. Let me just find the one that I found just this morning. I think that was from Telegraph. they were saying that. Okay, I cannot find it, but I will recall it. I will just try to recall it. So that was the article from the Western journalists saying that Europe is losing from the country, from the continent, huge continent that were kind of a geopolitical leader in the world. They become super weak. They cannot confront nor the United States or China or even Russia. Do you see that like this?
I think Europe is much stronger than they think it is. Europe is stronger than Russia. Europe is stronger than any of the hostile nations that hate democracy.
Yes.
The biggest problem is Europe isn't united enough yet, and Europe doesn't agree yet on how severe the Russian threat is. And Ukraine could be the trigger for that. Russia showing Europe just how severe the situation is. And actually watching Russian propaganda and television every single day showing that Putin isn't going to stop at Ukraine is beginning at the first stages of Europe actually waking up and doing what it needs to do, building its own defense, building its own army in a way that it needs to. But Europe has a confidence issue, not a military issue. Europe just needs the confidence in itself to realize that it needs to defend itself in the same way that Ukraine has. And I think it's possible. I think genuinely we're at a turning point where they could actually start that process. And this is why I went to Estonia, and watching the British, the Americans, everyone together, firing those tanks, practicing, and helping fortify Estonia is probably the early stages of Europe finally realizing the Russian threat and that the Cold War never stopped. It got hotter.
Caolan, you know what? Usually I'm going to Davos conferences in Switzerland, and lots of international speakers every year saying that Europe is finally realizing the threat of Russia. And you know, one of the soldiers, the guy, he has no arm, so he said in front of the huge audience, he said, you know what? I feel like Europe is a little kid who's waking up. The parents waking up him, and then he's waking up, the kid is waking up and saying, can I have 5 more minutes? 5 more minutes, and he's falling asleep.
Yeah.
That's the impression I have for Europe. I cannot underestimate the help they are giving to Ukraine. But I mean, can you imagine, Caolan, if they will deploy the military to Ukraine, even to the west of Ukraine, there will be game changer in all this war.
It would stop in seconds. Also, if we stopped buying Russian oil and gas, it would stop in seconds.
That's also. Well. But yeah, I was reading that in the European Union countries like Belgium, Hungary, Slovakia, they were buying in June Russian oil and gas for 1 billion euros in just 1 month.
More than aid to Ukraine.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. Well, Europe are paying for their own invasion by doing this. This is what's insane. And these are gas pipelines pumping gas and oil into Europe. And we're sending money to the Kremlin so that they can invade Europe. So we're paying for our own invasion.
Yeah, that was the article saying how Europe is paying for Russia to attack Ukrainian cities, something like that.
Yeah. And again, I would say every country in Europe, including Ukraine, is Europe. So whether it's Hungary or Germany buying Russian gas, they are paying for the invasion of Europe. And they're part of Europe. They're paying to have themselves invaded. I don't know when that's going to stop, if that's going to stop. It's difficult. You know, when Russia stole Crimea, Angela Merkel took Putin for brunch and opened the Nord Stream pipeline. And if Russia succeeds, which I don't think it will, but if it were to succeed in invading Ukraine, I don't know what kind of conversations would take place after that. And it's really, really hard. Most of my focus is just showing the reality of what's happening on the front, going against Russian propagandists. And I try to be as positive as possible. But I don't know, maybe this is the beginning stages of Europe waking up, maybe it isn't. It's if they don't and Ukraine continues having to fight this themselves, I don't know how Ukrainians can forgive Europe for holding back so much for so long. I don't know how they can forgive their so-called partners if they don't step in as they should quicker. If
they will begin to invest a lot after war, maybe I don't know. That's a very hard question. You know, some predict that the war will last at least to 2034, at least. Well, that's what I've heard. Yeah. From what you've seen, from what you have seen on the battlefield, is that even realistic for Ukraine and for Russia?
Again, it will take 4 years for Russia at current advances to take the 4 regions that they are wanting to take. I don't think, based on everything that I've looked at and the experts that I've spoken to and what I've seen on the battlefield, that Russia can do this for another year and a half without changing rapidly, without new mobilizations in Moscow, or without drastic differences. So I think that's also why Putin went to Alaska. That's also why Putin is now desperately talking for these sort of ceasefires, because they're doing this from a point of weakness. They're sort of worried that maybe they can't carry on this for as long as they want to carry on. So I think there'll be something that stops or something that changes in about a year. They physically don't have the number of people that are ready to fight to continue this for that much longer. And Ukrainians are losing a lot less soldiers than the Russians are. A, because they're much smarter in their tactics, but B, because they're using ground robots to storm trenches now, like the Azov battalion are doing. And they're using drones in a much more effective way to save human life. But I can't see it. After visiting the front for 2.5 years, I can't see Russia taking what they want to take. I just don't think it's possible. I think they will advance, and they'll continue to advance. They'll take Pokrovsk. They'll probably take Konstantinivka, and I think that'll be it. And I think they will be spent. But again, this is the most complex and difficult to analyze war in Europe since World War II. And I don't think anyone knows really what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still in shock how for years and decades they were portraying themselves as one of the largest and most powerful armies in the world.
Because if you have nothing, all you have is projection, all you have is lies. Yeah. You know, it's like, we always used to joke in school, like the poorest kid always had like the Gucci bag. You know, it's always someone that's always showing off the most, is always broke. It's like, if you don't have anything, your insecurity will step up for it instead, and you'll lie to the world. And that's why don't poke the Russian bear. It's all about propaganda and might, because it's a facade. All the gold buildings in St. Petersburg and Moscow they boasted about were built by European architects, or they're just a thin layer of gold paint. It's a facade.
Now we see gold in the Oval Office too.
Well, it's a pretty similar place.
Have you seen it?
I have seen it. It's unfortunate. Yeah, well, it's just tacky. It's just very tacky and sort of embarrassing behavior, really. But it's also because, you know, people like Trump, I think, really like Putin because they respect that Putin doesn't have protests. They respect that Putin can't be criticized because he will kill the protesters. And I think he respects that authority and that sort of dominance and power. And I think that's why he likes places like Moscow and why he's painted the White House to look like that. And this is also, it's just where things are going. And this is also like, what, 8-9 months into Trump's presidency? And it's been like this only in 8 or 9 months. I think it's going to get significantly worse. Yeah,
I was about to ask you that. That was my final question. Actually, I wanted to ask you about Alaska. Did you see it was coming? Did you see it was coming? The red carpet, soldiers on their knees. Did you see it was coming? I mean, and now I don't know what's to expect next. Probably another Putin's win, diplomatic win, if Donald Trump will go to Moscow.
I think it's very possible. When people were speculating whether Putin would actually go to Alaska, I said absolutely he will, because Putin won that before he got on a plane to Alaska. His thing that he won was legitimacy. Whenever Putin can get a camera in front of him and stand next to a world leader, he'll take a good photo of it, because Russia is isolated, but all they need right now and all that they're desperate for right now is the image of still being relevant and serious on the world stage, still being a mighty superpower that should be taken seriously, legitimacy. And Putin got that when American soldiers rolled out a red carpet for him, when he was invited to a brunch described as His Excellency Vladimir Putin and given hors d'oeuvres in American soil. So it wasn't surprising, it's depressing, but this is what's to be expected from Trump. Trump thinks that Putin is his friend. When Putin commissioned that painting of Trump, which was given to him about last year, he genuinely thinks that he's his buddy. And if Putin does something to disappoint him, like bombs this city, he just does a slap on the wrist. He says, oh, that's annoying. It's like a high school friend that's kind of betraying you every now and then. And this will continue. Putin will go, I think, Freudian slip, I think Trump will go to Moscow and he'll think that it's some sort of diplomacy. It'll be another win for Russia on the world stage. But all of these conferences should be ignored. My main thing is, if you're a journalist and you want to cover this, go to Estonia, go to Ukraine. This is what the Russian threat really is. Go to the front lines. If you want to listen to what Putin really wants, go and listen to...
Ignore him.
Yeah, go to Sumy, go to Kharkiv and see what he really wants. Listen to the sounds of explosions.
I got it. So in the nearest future, what we're going to see, that Ukraine will be pushed by 2 large countries in the world.
Pushed?
To push to peace negotiations, or the United States and Russia.
I think Zelensky is being amazing at how he's dealing with Trump and placating his ego.
You think so?
Yeah, he's doing what he needs to do, which is to
Yeah.
basically, to get the minimum from America is to hope that Americans don't lift sanctions on Russia, never even mind aid to Ukraine, just to hope that they have a bit of a distance from Russia. And by Zelensky changing his fashion, by Zelensky joking around with Trump and being as nice as possible, he's placating his ego. That's all you can do with Trump right now. But honestly, Ukrainians, and I think the Ukrainian government, and I know I've sat opposite Zelensky a lot of times this year, and I think I have a sort of an idea into what the mindset of the government is. It's, we are going to have to fight this with or without the support of the United States. That's why Operation Spiderweb has been happening. That's why Ukraine has developed its own missiles, the Flamingo missile, because they're thinking, okay, yep, very good, thank you, Trump, very, very great. Let's keep on working in the background and fight this ourselves. And they basically realized where they are, which is alone outside of America. A lot of Americans support this country, but the American government isn't in a position to give this country what it needs. So they're developing it themselves in their backyard. And it's super cool to see, actually. The innovation is insane. I mean, I told a couple of journalists a few years ago that I thought that this country would develop its own cruise missiles. And they said that was ludicrous. They said it would take decades. They said it would be almost impossible. And they have been flying them into Russia's airspace for the last few days. That is unprecedented.
Unprecedented, true.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing. I think Ukraine have realized, okay, if that's going to be the situation, if America isn't going to give us this, we'll develop it ourselves and we're going to fight this ourselves.
I think sometimes Ukrainians just in a shock from themselves, for what we are capable for.
For so long, this country was oppressed as well. Ukrainians were treated like second-class citizens by the Soviet Union. And this was a country that wasn't confident before 2014. And I think a lot of generations of Ukrainians, from people that I've spoken to, felt like they didn't have confidence on the world stage. Like maybe Ukraine wasn't a significant country. It wasn't a big place. It wasn't like New York. It wasn't like Shanghai. It's just this like little Eastern European place. And there's this new confidence that I just see and the smile everywhere here. And it's like, they know where they are now. They know how important this country is and how capable the population of this country is and how respected it is. I mean, now has one of the most feared armies in the world in terms of technology and what they're doing. Then Ukrainians finally, it feels like, have the confidence that they deserve.
Yeah, I've heard the idea from the foreign minister, the former foreign minister, and Dmytro Kuleba. Once he said that you will see someday Ukraine will be the safest place in the world. Well, after the war will end. So
yeah.
Probably this is our path to it.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Caolan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely in your studio talking about all of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you are so brilliant. Yeah, thank you for your work.
I really appreciate it.